First of all, I'd like to thank TMS for having me here and all the esteemed speakers before me for setting up the stage. My topic for today is geopolitics and tanker shipping. I'll take up from where Mr. Ibrahim has left, and I'll talk with a little bit of numbers. So this is the current state of the tanker market, and my presentation will be mainly focused on the crude tanker market. I'm not touching upon the product tanker market, the crude tanker market. I think in this there are two things that you need to look at. One is deliveries and demolitions, which have been almost non-existent in the past couple of years. And the other thing is newbuilding prices and second-hand values. They have been pretty robust in the last couple of years. And deep beneath those numbers lies this chart, which is the age profile of the current tanker fleet. Why I have this is a very important chart. Almost 35% of the crude tanker fleet today is 20 years or more. You look at any other sector, this fleet or 20 plus years age is virtually unemployable. But in the tanker market, they are not only employed, but they're making a lot of money. And take a moment to look at this chart. What has happened in the last 3 years? Even though the trade has declined in tonnage terms, the shipping demand has outpaced the trade growth. Trade has only increased at 1.1% CAGR in the last 5 years, whereas the tonnage demand has increased by 1.6%. That means each tonnage is traveling more distance, which is great for shipping. And during the same period, from 2023 to 2025, the fleet has almost stagnated, which is, again, very good for the industry. The supply is fixed, demand is increasing, ships are traveling longer distances. What else could you wish for? Now let's talk a little bit about geopolitics, how it is affecting the market. This is the timeline of all the events, not just geopolitical events, which has some sort of impact on the tanker shipping business, starting with the IMO's fuel regulation that required minimum sulfur content to be reduced in 2020. Then the industry was hit with COVID, which resulted in 4% decline in shipping demand. And then there were tariffs, now the sanctions, and last week, US sanctioned 2 Russian companies, and all these events have material impact on the freight rates, the earnings of the tankers. I want you to look at these 2 charts. The first chart shows the average distance traveled by tankers. In 2021, following the COVID, there was a decline of 4% in the average distance traveled by tankers on each voyage. Obviously, COVID did help with that. And then the following years, in 2022 and in 2023, when early part of 2022, when Russia-Ukraine war broke out, that meant that ships had to realign the trade. They had to travel longer distances, and we saw an increase in the average voyage distance. Come 2024, there was another stimuli, the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. And the Suez Canal virtually was sealed off because no vessels were going through that. And that you can see in the next chart. There was 31% year-over-year decline in the traffic, northbound traffic in the Suez Canal. And that again meant that ships had to take longer voyages. So geopolitical events, all the risks that are generally considered bad for the business were actually helping the tanker shipping. Another event, Russia-Ukraine war. Now look at this chart. At the start of 2022, January, EU was one of the largest trading partners for Russian oil. And that has completely changed as we stand today. India, which were nowhere to be seen in the picture in January 2022, is now among one of the largest importers of Russian oil. And what that meant, was longer voyage distances. So this factor also helped tanker shipping. Now let's address the elephant in the room, which is sanctioned vessels. We call it dark fleet, shadow fleet, whatever names you want to call it, but they do exist. Now I want you to look at this chart and relate it to the chart that I showed you about the age profile. 35% of 20-plus year vessels still sailing, and this number, 20% of the total crude tanker fleet sailing in dark fleet. So there is clearly some overlap between these two. And as sanctions tighten up, we believe that these numbers are only going to rise. So this, in a way, gives an opportunity for the older vessels to circumvent all the processes, all the legal procedures that exist and still trade in the market. It has, some positives, some negatives, but we are not going to delve into that. We are just putting the reality in front of you. Now, geopolitical conflicts around the world will have impact on shipping. Yesterday, Yalda Hakim talked about it, and this chart represents it through pictures. Every time there has been something, there has been movement in the tanker market. This is the movement of BDTI mapped to all the key events that have shaped it in the past 5 years. Now, let's talk about tariffs. Now, I want to give you a disclaimer. Everything I say from now until I finish talking about tariffs, my statements are only valid till then. After that, I take no responsibility of anything. In the last 8 months, the tariffs have moved from 10% to 145%. And every time you wake up, there is something else in the news. So you don't even know what you're dealing with. The situation is so fluid. As we speak, depending on what kind of commodity you are trading, the tariff on China is something between 30 to 54%. And there are chances that they'll get into a trade deal by 10th of November, but fingers crossed, because China has strengthened its position by putting a counter to USTR. Now, I just want to throw this question around the house. How many of you think that USTR or China's retaliatory tariff port fees is actually tenable? Forget about long run, even in the short run. How many of you truly believe that it's tenable? No hands. I believe so. Because I think it's only a ploy to get into a position of strength. Let me put this thing in perspective. USTR, if implemented initially in 2025, will cost $1 million in port fees on top of whatever is already there, and it progressively increases to $13.5 million by 2028 for each voyage. Now, that's almost like 10% the cost of a VLCC. You pay 5 times in a year because that's the cap. You only have to pay 5 times. Half of the vessel's cost is gone. I don't think it's a regulation to collect tariff or port fees. I think it's a regulation to gain the position of strength when they sit down for the trade negotiation. I don't know how many of you knew there's something called World Uncertainty Index. And I'll tell you how it is calculated. Economic intelligence units of different countries produce reports, economic reports about the country. And every time this word uncertainty pops up in those reports, they take a measure of that. And in the last year or so, This line is literally going off the chart. If I had forgotten to adjust my scale, it was literally off the chart. And there comes the opportunity. Look at this chart. It coincides with the peak for performance of the tanker market. So uncertainty doesn't always mean that you don't make money. Those who are prepared for it will make a lot of money during uncertain times. Because business as usual is never the time to make money. So, talking about outlook. Now, geopolitics is not going away anytime soon. I'm a firm believer. I believe in peace, and I believe that Russia-Ukraine war will settle down at some point. But there is no guarantee that there will be no other conflict in the near future or in the foreseeable future. So geopolitics is not going anywhere. It's here to stay. Now, what do we do about it? I think as an industry, if we know our circumstances, if we know the scenarios, we prepare well, we can always adjust our decision making around that. And that is where opportunity comes. The only thing that has changed in the past 2.5 years is that these geopolitical or external factors, let's call it external factors, are more frequent now. The rate of these events have increased. Therefore, the windows of opportunities are shorter. And that, I think, is what you will need to prepare for, how to take advantage of those shorter windows. My friend Deepak yesterday asked me, and I said that we are a maritime research and consulting firm, and he asked me this question again, what do you do? So now I'll answer that question, Deepak, for you. We produce maritime research reports. We advise our clients, mainly shipping companies, ports, governments, financial institutions, on matters related to shipping business. And if you ever need any help with anything, you know where to reach out. Thank you so much.